a woman discovers her identical twin has been quietly living pieces of her life, wearing her name like a second skin. The same face, the same voice, the same man. She's been slipping into appointments, into friendships, and into her fiancé's arms, all while hiding a pregnancy she claims belongs to someone close. But identical twins share more than just a face. They share DNA, and one simple home test doesn't just reveal paternity. It exposes which sister has been telling the truth, and which one has been forging signatures on loans worth tens of thousands of dollars. For Jennifer, it started with a nagging feeling. A coworker greeting her warmly at a store she'd never visited. A charge from a spa clear across town. Her identical twin Elizabeth had just moved back, and she wasn't just borrowing Jennifer's face. She was quietly stepping into her entire life. The question, was she also stealing the man Jennifer was about to marry? Jennifer and Daniel had been together since college. He was the steady kind, the one who remembered anniversaries and brought her soup when she was sick. When he proposed on a hiking trail overlooking the Pacific, she said yes before he even finished the question. They set a date, booked a venue, and started building a life that felt bulletproof. Then Elizabeth came back. Her identical twin sister had spent the last 3 years drifting through boyfriends and failed business ventures in Arizona. But now she was in town, claiming she wanted a fresh start. Jennifer, always the caretaker, opened her home and her schedule. Dinners, double dates, letting Elizabeth crash on the couch when her new apartment fell through. She told herself it was just for a few weeks. The first red flag arrived in a text message. A coworker said it was so good running into you at the Nordstrom in Scottsdale last weekend. Jennifer had been home repainting the guest room that entire weekend. She stared at the screen, then laughed it off. The woman must have mistaken someone else for her. But it happened again. A spa charge on her credit card for a location 40 miles from her office. A new store loyalty account she never opened, already racked up points. Elizabeth always had a plausible explanation. She'd borrowed Jennifer's card to pick up something for dinner and must have used it by mistake. She was sorry, she'd pay it back. Jennifer wanted to believe her. They shared the same face, the same voice, the same childhood. But Elizabeth had also always been the one who borrowed without asking, who lied with a smile, who somehow made you feel guilty for noticing. Then Daniel started acting strange. He was still affectionate, still present, but there was a new hesitation in his eyes. He'd come home late from work and mention he'd run into Elizabeth, that she'd needed someone to talk to. Jennifer asked him what they talked about, and he said it was nothing important. But he stopped meeting her eyes when he said it. One night Jennifer came home early from a work trip. Daniel wasn't there, but on the kitchen counter sat a pink gift bag with a card tucked inside. The note was in Elizabeth's handwriting. It said, "Thank you for last night. I'll never forget it. Love." Jennifer's hands went cold. She called Daniel. He swore nothing happened. Elizabeth had dropped by upset. He'd listened. She'd left the bag by mistake. But the damage was done. The woman who shared her DNA was now sharing something far more intimate, her fiancé's attention. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Elizabeth arrived late, glowing. She barely touched her food. When Jennifer asked if she was feeling okay, Elizabeth smiled and placed a hand on her stomach. "I have some news," she said. "I'm pregnant. And the father is someone very close to both of us." The room tilted. Jennifer turned to Daniel, whose face had gone completely white. Elizabeth added nothing else. She simply let the devastating silence do her work. That night after Elizabeth left, Jennifer didn't scream or cry. She opened her laptop and ordered an at-home DNA test kit. She didn't know yet about the $40,000 loan Elizabeth had taken out in her name, or the recordings Daniel had been secretly making. All she knew was that she needed the truth about the baby. What she would discover would unravel far more than a betrayal. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday. Jennifer sat alone at the kitchen table, the unopened box between her hands. Daniel was at work. She told him nothing about the test. The silence in the house felt like a held breath. When she finally tore the seal and read the report, she had to read it 3 times. Daniel was not the father. The baby Elizabeth was carrying had no genetic connection to the man Jennifer was supposed to marry. Relief hit first, a wave that nearly buckled her knees. Then confusion. Why had Elizabeth implied otherwise? What had she and Daniel been meeting about? If not an affair, what secret required so many late-night conversations and that cryptic thank you note? Jennifer called Daniel and asked him to come home immediately. When he walked through the door 30 minutes later, she held up the test results and demanded the truth. Every single piece of it. What Daniel told her over the next 2 hours dismantled everything she thought she understood. He had never been unfaithful. From the very first week Elizabeth returned, she had been pursuing him, not subtly. She'd shown up at his office, sent late-night texts, cornered him at family gatherings with whispers about how much she wished she'd met him first. When he rejected her, she escalated. She threatened to tell Jennifer they were sleeping together unless Daniel agreed to meet her just to talk. Those talks were never about bonding. They were her attempts to manipulate him, to plant doubts, to rewrite reality. And Daniel, terrified of losing Jennifer, had started recording every single interaction. He opened his laptop and played the first file. Elizabeth's voice filled the room. She was laughing, mocking Jennifer's trusting nature, describing how easy it was to impersonate her. Same signature, same face, same credit profile. You think she'd notice a few extra charges. She never checks her statements. Then another recording, dated the week of the pregnancy announcement. Elizabeth was telling Daniel he could either leave Jennifer willingly or she'd destroy him with a false paternity claim. She had a plan. She'd already told people he was the father. She'd already practiced the tears. Who would believe him over a pregnant woman with that face, that voice, the identical DNA? Daniel had gone to the police, but without a crime committed, they could do little. So he kept recording. He built a fortress of audio files, time-stamped and backed up in 3 locations. He was waiting for the right moment to show Jennifer everything, to protect her not just from the accusation but from the woman who had weaponized their biology against them both. Jennifer listened to every recording. 5 hours, 7 conversations, a pattern of predation that turned her stomach. But the last recording was the one that changed everything. In it, Elizabeth casually mentioned a loan she'd taken out in Jennifer's name. $40,000 from a private lender, approved with a signature that looked exactly like Jennifer's because Elizabeth had spent weeks practicing it. She had used their shared likeness as a skeleton key to a vault of credit she never intended to repay. Jennifer checked her credit report that night. The loan was there, delinquent by 60 days, flagged for collections. Her score had dropped over 100 points. The lender had been sending notices to an address she didn't recognize, a P.O. box Elizabeth had opened in her name. The wedding venue, the mortgage application they just started, their entire financial future, all of it now sat under a cloud of fraudulent debt. The next morning, Jennifer called the lender and recorded the call. She explained the situation, provided samples of her actual signature, and asked to see the loan documents. When they arrived, the forgery was obvious to anyone looking closely. The loops on the J were wrong. The pressure was too heavy. But to a loan officer who'd only ever seen a scanned copy of Jennifer's driver's license, Elizabeth's imitation had been good enough. Because the photo on that license was identical to the woman who signed. But here's the thing about identical twins. They share DNA, but fingerprints are unique. Even in the womb, environmental factors create subtle differences in the ridges and whorls. And modern forensic techniques can now distinguish between 2 people who share the same genetic code by examining those differences. Jennifer learned all of this in the days that followed, her kitchen table now covered in printouts about signature analysis, fingerprint authentication, and the rare but real phenomenon of twin identity fraud faced by law enforcement agencies across the country. She filed a police report. Then she filed a civil suit. Elizabeth, confronted with the recordings, the DNA results, and the forgery evidence, did what she'd always done. She denied everything. She claimed the recordings were doctored, that Daniel had manipulated her, that Jennifer was jealous of her happiness. She posted a tearful video on social media about being attacked by her own family while pregnant and alone. The comments poured in, strangers taking sides, calling Jennifer a monster for turning on her twin. The harassment lasted weeks. Elizabeth filed her own police report claiming defamation. She told extended family members that Jennifer had driven her to the brink, that the loan was a misunderstanding, that the baby's father was a man she was too ashamed to name. Half the family believed her. Half of them had always believed her. But Jennifer had something Elizabeth didn't: a paper trail. And a fiancé who had loved her enough to document the truth before she even knew she needed it. The bank fraud charges moved forward. Elizabeth was looking at serious time. And the wedding, the one she tried to destroy, was still on. Yet the most devastating part wasn't the money or the court dates. It was what Jennifer found on Daniel's phone the night before they were supposed to walk down the aisle. It was a video. Recorded 3 days earlier, Elizabeth was sitting in her car, talking to someone on speakerphone. The other voice belonged to a woman Jennifer didn't recognize. Elizabeth was laughing, describing the wedding as her personal victory party. She told the friend the pregnancy had been a complete fiction from the start. There was no baby. There had never been a baby. She had used a friend's positive test photo and a carefully rehearsed story to pressure Daniel into leaving Jennifer. When that failed, she planned to fake a miscarriage at the rehearsal dinner and blame the stress Jennifer was causing her. The entire family would turn on the bride, the wedding would collapse, and Elizabeth would be there to pick up the pieces. Jennifer watched the video 7 times. Then she called her attorney. Then she called the district attorney handling the fraud case. Then she called every wedding guest and told them the truth, not the sanitized version she'd been telling to keep the peace. Full, unedited, recorded truth. Elizabeth was arrested the morning of what was supposed to be Jennifer's wedding day. The charges now included criminal impersonation, forgery, bank fraud, and filing a false police report. The $40,000 would be recovered. Jennifer's credit would be restored. But the damage to the family and to the twin bond that had once defined her earliest memories, that was permanent. Jennifer and Daniel married 3 months later at a small ceremony in the mountains. No bridal party, no father-daughter dance, just 30 people who had stood by them through every recording, every accusation, every moment of the nightmare. Elizabeth was in a county jail awaiting trial, her calls to family members going unanswered. The relatives who had believed her story were now reading transcripts of her own voice detailing her crimes. Apologies trickled in. Jennifer accepted some. She ignored others. For the first time in her life, she stopped managing other people's guilt. But the story doesn't end there. While preparing the fraud case, investigators discovered something Jennifer hadn't known to look for. Elizabeth had done this before, not with a twin, but with a former roommate in Arizona. Same pattern, same manipulation, same financial fraud. That case had been dropped when the roommate moved away and declined to testify. Elizabeth had been a predator long before she came home to roost. The only difference this time was that her victims had fought back and they had the receipts. Literally. The lender filed a civil suit. The bank filed charges. The state picked up the impersonation case. Elizabeth's public defender floated an insanity defense, but the recordings made that nearly impossible. A woman who carefully plans weeks of manipulation, practices a forged signature, and scripts a false accusation doesn't look insane to a jury. She looks methodical. She looks dangerous. She looked exactly like the woman sitting in the front row of the courtroom, taking notes for the prosecution. Jennifer attended every hearing. Not for revenge, she told Daniel, for closure. She needed to watch the system affirm what she had always known, that sharing a face does not mean sharing a soul, that biology is not destiny, that the woman who tried to steal her life had, in the end, only succeeded in revealing her own emptiness. 1 year after the arrest, Elizabeth accepted a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release, mandatory restitution, and a permanent no-contact order. She would not be at family reunions. She would not meet Jennifer's future children. She would exist only in court records and in the fading memory of a twin sister who had finally stopped grieving someone who never really existed in the first place. Jennifer now runs a support group for victims of familial fraud. Identity theft committed by a stranger is devastating. But identity theft committed by someone who shares your DNA, that's a particular kind of violation. She says the hardest part was never proving the crimes. It was accepting that the sister she thought she knew had been a fiction from the very beginning. Identical twins share a face, a voice, and a genetic code that even standard DNA testing can't tell apart. But they don't share a fingerprint, they don't share a signature, and they don't share a conscience. Jennifer's story isn't just about a sister who stole $40,000 and tried to steal a fiancé. It's about how the people closest to us can weaponize intimacy itself. The same face that smiled at her across the breakfast table was the one practicing her signature in a notebook late at night. Law enforcement sees cases like this more often than you'd think. Twins mixed up in credit files. One sibling using the other's identity for loans, for housing, even for criminal alibis. The technology to distinguish between identical twins exists now, next-generation sequencing that can find the handful of mutations that make you uniquely you. But it's expensive, it's slow, and most victims never get that far. Jennifer got lucky. She had a partner who documented the truth before she knew she needed it, and she had a paper trail her sister couldn't erase. What Elizabeth never understood is that identity isn't borrowed in a signature or a photograph. It's built in 1,000 invisible choices, in the people who trust you, in the life you show up for every day. She tried to steal Jennifer's world and ended up exposed inside her own emptiness. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who knows exactly where you keep your keys.